The rain had already soaked the ground when Daniel arrived at the cemetery, but he barely noticed. His world had narrowed to one small white coffin resting on the damp grass. 8 years of life reduced to a quiet box, surrounded by flowers that looked too bright for a day like this. Daniel stood still, his black coat hanging loose on his thin frame, his eyes fixed forward, as if looking away might cause everything to collapse at once. People gathered behind him in low, respectful clusters. Some whispered apologies. Others simply nodded, unsure of what to say to a father burying his child. Daniel accepted every presence without really seeing anyone. His chest felt tight, like he had forgotten how to breathe properly. At the front, 2 chairs sat empty. They were meant for his parents. Daniel kept glancing at them, even though he told himself not to. He had known, deep down, they would not come. Still, some small, foolish part of him had hoped grief might finally make them show up, that they would choose their grandson over comfort, over excuses, over themselves. But the chairs stayed empty. Only hours earlier his mother, Margaret, had called. Her voice had sounded tired but controlled, careful in the way she always was when she didn't want to look cruel. "We just can't manage the trip today," she had said. "Your father isn't feeling well, and emotionally, this is very hard for us." Daniel had stared at the wall while she spoke, watching a crack near the ceiling that he had meant to fix months ago. He hadn't argued. He hadn't begged. He simply said, "Okay," and ended the call. Now, as the pastor spoke softly about love and loss, the weight of that "okay" pressed down on him. His son deserved better. Ethan had always believed family meant showing up no matter what. Daniel's thoughts drifted to Ethan's laugh, quiet, sudden, like he surprised himself every time. Ethan had been the kind of child who asked too many questions and thought too deeply about simple things. He worried about animals he saw on the road. He saved broken toys because he believed they still mattered. Daniel's late wife, Anna, had noticed that gentleness early. Years ago, after a long legal process that followed an accident at her workplace, she had insisted on setting up a trust for Ethan. She didn't want uncertainty touching his future. The amount, $850,000, had seemed unreal at the time. Anna had said it wasn't about money. It was about safety. About choice. Daniel had promised her he would protect it. The coffin was lowered slowly. Daniel felt his knees weaken but stayed standing. When it was over, people approached him one by one. Hands squeezed his arm. Quiet words floated past his ears without meaning. Eventually, the crowd thinned, leaving Daniel alone with the grave and the rain. He waited longer than necessary before leaving, as if time itself might reverse if he stood there long enough. At home that night, the silence was unbearable. Ethan's shoes were still by the door. A half-finished puzzle sat on the coffee table. Daniel moved through the house like a stranger, touching nothing, afraid that even breathing too loudly would break something fragile. 3 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, sleepless nights, and empty mornings. Daniel returned to work because staying home hurt more. He avoided his parents' calls, though they were few. When the phone rang again one afternoon, he almost didn't answer. It was Margaret. Her tone was different this time, focused, almost businesslike. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said. He leaned against his desk, already tired. "This is about Ethan's trust," she continued. "We've been discussing it as a family." Daniel felt a cold drop in his stomach. "Your sister's wedding is coming up," Margaret said. "You know how important this is. There are expectations, costs. Given everything that's happened, it only makes sense to redirect the funds." Daniel closed his eyes. "Redirect?" he repeated quietly. "Well," she said, "Ethan won't be needing it now." And Clara is starting her life. This would help everyone. Daniel waited for her to mention the funeral, to say his son's name, to express regret. She didn't. You didn't come, Daniel said. Margaret sighed, annoyed. That's not fair. We explained. You skipped your grandson's funeral, he said, his voice steady but sharp. And now you're asking for his money. There was a pause. Daniel imagined her tight smile, the one she used when she believed she was being reasonable. We're family, she said. This isn't about emotion. It's about practicality. Daniel laughed once, short and hollow. You always liked Clara more, he said. I accepted that. But this is something else. Robert's voice suddenly joined the call, firm and distant. Don't be dramatic, Daniel. The money should be useful. That's all. Double quotes, useful. Daniel felt something break inside him then. Not loudly, not all at once. It was a clean break, like ice cracking under pressure. That trust was created by Ethan's mother, Daniel said. It was meant for him. And he's gone, Margaret replied, her voice sharp now. Life goes on. Daniel ended the call without another word. He sat there long after, staring at his phone. The grief he had been carrying shifted into something darker, heavier. This wasn't just neglect. It wasn't ignorance. It was choice. That night, Daniel stood in Ethan's room, surrounded by drawings taped to the wall. One showed their family holding hands, all smiling. Even the grandparents were there. Daniel pressed his hand against the wall and felt anger rise, not loud, not wild, but focused. His parents had crossed a line they could not uncross. For the first time since Ethan's death, Daniel thought not just about loss but about justice. Daniel did not call his parents back. Days passed, then weeks, and the silence between them grew thick. At first, he welcomed it. The quiet gave him space to breathe, to think, to feel something other than grief. But anger has a way of filling empty spaces, and soon it followed him everywhere. He replayed the call in his head while driving, while showering, while lying awake at night. Every word felt sharper the second time around. Useful. The word stuck to him like a stain. His son's life reduced to a balance sheet, a wedding expense, something to be moved around when convenient. Daniel began to see his childhood through a new lens. Clara had always been the center. Her piano lessons came before his school trips. Her mistakes were softened, explained away. When Daniel struggled, he was told to be strong. When Clara cried, the world stopped. Daniel had learned early that fairness was not something he could expect from his parents. Still, he had never imagined they would extend that pattern to Ethan. At work, Daniel moved through meetings like a ghost. He completed tasks automatically, smiled when required, and left as soon as the day ended. His mind was elsewhere, running through memories and imagined conversations. Sometimes the anger scared him. It was focused, patient, and growing. Letters arrived next, not handwritten, official, carefully worded. Margaret framed her request as concern. She wrote about family unity, about honoring Ethan's memory by helping his aunt begin her future without financial stress. Robert added a note about responsibility and legacy. They spoke as if Daniel were a stubborn child refusing to share, not a father protecting the last thing his son had been given. Daniel read each letter once, then locked them in a drawer. Late at night, he opened the trust documents on his laptop. Anna had made sure everything was clear. The money was protected. No one could touch it without Daniel's consent. That fact should have brought him peace. Instead, it sparked something else. He imagined saying yes, then watching their faces when he changed his mind at the last moment. He imagined attending, the wedding and letting the truth slip at the dinner table, calmly explaining where the money came from and why it mattered. He imagined his parents forced to sit with the judgment of others, their carefully managed image cracking in public. The ideas felt wrong and yet powerful. Daniel hated that part of himself, the part that wanted to hurt them the way they had hurt him. But he also understood it. For weeks, he had swallowed pain in silence. Revenge offered release. It promised balance. One evening, Daniel drove without a destination. The city lights blurred past as his thoughts raced. He parked near a quiet park and sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel. He thought about Ethan, about the way his son avoided conflict, the way he apologized even when he hadn't done anything wrong. Once, after a disagreement at school, Ethan had asked, "Why do people try to win instead of fix things?" Daniel hadn't known how to answer then. Now the question echoed louder than ever. Meanwhile, Margaret and Robert convinced themselves they were right. Margaret told friends that Daniel was overwhelmed and not thinking clearly. She said grief made people selfish. Robert believed money was meant to support the living, not sit untouched as a reminder of loss. In their private talks, they agreed Daniel would come around once emotions settled. They never considered apologizing. As the wedding date moved closer, the pressure increased. Clara reached out, her messages polite but distant. She said she didn't want to get involved, but mentioned costs, expectations, embarrassment. Daniel could read between the lines. She wanted the money, but didn't want to be blamed. Each message pushed Daniel closer to a decision. One night, he pulled out a box of Ethan's things. Inside were drawings, small notes, and a folded piece of paper Daniel had never seen before. It was a short letter Ethan had written at school. It said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to help people feel safe." Daniel sat on the floor and cried for the first time since the funeral. The anger didn't disappear, but it shifted. Revenge suddenly felt small compared to that sentence. Still, the urge to act did not leave him. Daniel realized the fight was no longer just with his parents. It was inside him. One path led to confrontation, exposure, and a sharp sense of justice. The other led to restraint, to walking away while still holding his ground. Both paths had a cost. As the wedding approached, Daniel knew he could not stay silent forever. Silence felt like approval, but destruction felt like betrayal to Ethan's memory, to the man Daniel wanted to be. The conflict tightened around him, pressing harder with each passing day. Whatever choice he made would define more than the fate of the trust. It would define how he carried his grief forward, whether it turned into something bitter or something steady. And time was running out. The wedding day arrived faster than Daniel expected. He stood in front of his mirror, adjusting a dark suit he had not worn since the funeral. His reflection looked older, sharper around the eyes. Sleep had been scarce, but his thoughts were clear. Today, something would end one way or another. The drive to the venue was quiet. Daniel turned off the radio and focused on the road, each mile bringing him closer to a choice he could no longer avoid. He replayed every possible outcome, every word he might say. None of them felt light. The venue stood on a wide stretch of land, white walls glowing under the afternoon sun. Guests arrived in bright clothes, laughter floating through the air. It felt wrong, this happiness standing so close to his grief. Yet life moved forward without apology. When Daniel walked inside, conversations slowed. His parents noticed him. At the same moment, Margaret's face shifted with surprise, then relief. Robert gave a short nod, as if Daniel's presence confirmed an unspoken agreement. Clara looked at him from across the room, uncertain but hopeful. No one asked why he had come. The ceremony passed in a blur. Daniel sat in the back row, hands folded, eyes forward. As vows were exchanged, his mind drifted to another promise, one he had made to Anna, to protect what she left behind. That promise anchored him at the reception. Music filled the room. Glasses clinked. Smiles were wide and practiced. Margaret approached him with careful warmth, touching his arm as if nothing had happened. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. "It means a lot to Clara." Daniel nodded but said nothing. Later, an organizer handed him a microphone. "Family toast," she said with a smile. The room quieted as Daniel walked toward the center. Every step felt heavy. This was the moment he had imagined so many times, his heart pounding as the weight of the room settled on him. He looked out at the guests, at Clara, waiting, at his parents, alert and tense. Words rose in his throat, truth sharp and ready. He could expose everything. He could describe the empty chairs at the funeral, the cold call, the letters that treated his son like a forgotten account. He could let the room judge them. His grip tightened on the microphone. Then a memory surfaced, clear and gentle. Ethan at the kitchen table, struggling with homework, growing frustrated. Daniel had once raised his voice, tired and impatient. Ethan had looked up and said, "Dad, please don't be mad. I'm trying." Daniel's chest tightened. He took a breath. "I want to congratulate Clara," Daniel began, his voice steady. "I hope your life together is full of respect and kindness." A few guests smiled. Daniel paused, then continued. "I also need to be clear about something important. The trust created for my son will remain exactly as it was intended. It will not be used for anything else." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Margaret's face stiffened. Robert's jaw tightened. "That trust exists because a mother wanted to protect her child," Daniel said. "That purpose doesn't change, even when the child is gone." Silence filled the space. Daniel handed the microphone back and stepped away. No raised voices followed. No public argument. The moment passed, heavy and undeniable. Margaret tried to stop him near the exit. "This wasn't the place," she whispered sharply. "There was never going to be a place you liked," Daniel replied. Outside, the air felt cooler. Daniel stood still for a moment, listening to the muffled music inside. He felt no rush of victory, no relief, only clarity. He had not destroyed them. He had not surrendered as he drove away. Daniel understood that revenge did not always look like punishment. Sometimes it looked like refusal, like choosing not to become what pain tried to make you. The decision was made. The days after the wedding were quiet, but not peaceful. Daniel felt the absence of noise more than comfort. His phone stayed silent. No apologies came. No explanations followed. The distance between him and his parents settled into something solid, no longer raw, just firm. At first, Daniel waited for regret. He expected guilt to rise, the doubt to creep in late at night, and whisper that he should have done more, said more, hurt them back the way they had hurt him. But those thoughts never fully arrived. What came instead was exhaustion. Grief changed shape. It no longer burned. It pressed. Mornings were slow. Evenings were long. Daniel returned home every day to a house that still carried Ethan's presence. The shoes by the door remained. The drawings stayed on the walls. Daniel stopped avoiding them. One afternoon, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and opened the trust documents again. He read them carefully, not with anger this time, but with purpose. The money was meant to protect, not divide. He realized leaving it untouched forever would turn it into a symbol of loss instead of care. An idea formed, simple and quiet. Daniel met with a lawyer and a school counselor. He spoke about Ethan, about his kindness, about the way he wanted people to feel safe. Together they shaped something new, a scholarship fund. Not large, not public, but meaningful. It would help children who needed stability during difficult times. Daniel signed the papers without hesitation. When the first letter of thanks arrived, written by a parent whose child had received support, Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't happiness. It was release. Margaret called weeks later. Her voice was softer than before, but careful. "We heard what you did with the money," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied. There was a pause. "You didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to," Daniel answered. She did not apologize. Neither did Robert. But they did not argue again. The demands were gone. The pressure ended. Daniel understood then that some people never admit fault, even when faced with the cost of their choices. Waiting for their remorse would keep him stuck. Life moved forward. Daniel returned to routines. Work became manageable again. Nights grew quieter. Some evenings he sat in Ethan's room and talked out loud. Not because he expected answers, but because it helped. He spoke about the anger he had felt, about the moment he almost chose revenge, about how close he had come to letting bitterness take control. Slowly, Daniel realized something important. Revenge would have kept the wound open. It would have tied his healing to their pain. By stepping away, he reclaimed ownership of his grief. One day, Daniel passed the park where he had once sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, filled with rage. This time, he stopped and walked instead. Children were playing nearby. Laughter floated through the air. It didn't hurt the way it used to. Daniel thought about the lesson he had learned, one he wished he could explain to Ethan. Justice is not always loud. Strength is not always force. Sometimes, the bravest choice is choosing what kind of person you will be when no one is watching. Daniel's parents remained distant figures, not enemies, not family in the way he once hoped, just people who had made choices he could not change. He no longer tried. The trust was no longer a source of conflict. It became a quiet legacy. Not of money, but of intention. One evening, as Daniel stood by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a sense of calm settle in. The pain had not vanished, but it no longer controlled him. Revenge had promised satisfaction. What Daniel found instead was peace. And that, he realized, was worth far more.